Good afternoon. It's Catherine again, and welcome back. Today I'm going to read a story by Penny. We had neighbors that lived next door to us when we lived at 206 Linton Avenue. Their names were Charlie Engel and Bobbie Engel. They were very, very close to Mom and Daddy as well as to us. As you know in my Mind Your Manners story, manners were extremely important, and that would include always addressing adults by Mr. and Mrs. However, in the case of Bobbie and Charlie Engel, they absolutely insisted that we call them by their first names. And because of the closeness of the families, Mom and Daddy allowed it. So you will see that Penny refers to them as Charlie and Bobbie Engel. The name of the story is There's Just One Bobbie. I stood on the front porch, tears falling down my cheeks until I could no longer see the back of our station wagon. Mama had to drop Daddy off at his law office across from the courthouse before taking all three of my sisters to Carpenter No. 1 and Braden for their first day of school. Bobbie was starting kindergarten today, and that meant for the first time I would be all alone, all day, without my sisters, without a playmate. Seeing that I was distraught, Leola reached down, picked me up, and said, "It'll be all right. They'll be home before you know it. Now let's go get dressed." Wandering aimlessly around the front yard, I saw a next-door neighbor, Bobbie Engel, a sweet lady in her mid-60s, pulling into her driveway. Bobbie was always beautifully dressed and wore lots of jewelry. She smelled good too. Since Bobbie was one of my parents' closest friends, I was told to skip the formalities and call her by her first name as a sign of affection. Even though Bobbie had always been kind to me, I was not in the mood for small talk. So I ran and I froze between the line of tall, skimpy trees that separated our yards. Desperately trying not to be seen, I watched as she got out of her car. She leaned in to get her purse and shut the door. "Penny Coleman, I see you. You come here right now." Shuffling my way over, I stood before her, looking at the ground. Putting her hand under my chin, she tilted my head back. "You've been crying, child. Your eyes are bloodshot. Are you hurt?" I stung the back of my throat with tears, but then tried to get it out. "Baba started school today." Her purse opened quickly and out popped a piece of strawberry candy. "Here you go. You suck on this. It'll make you feel better. Things will be okay, Penny. I promise you they will. And I don't make promises I can't keep, okay?" Well, strawberry was my favorite, so I took it and said thank you and headed home. Oh, how I dreaded the next morning. I wasn't even interested in the little bottle of chocolate milk that Mama put by my breakfast. Something was definitely wrong, for these bottles of chocolate milk were like gold to me. Mama had to special order them from the milkman. I can recall the sheer delight when we would see them waiting for us on the front porch, along with our 6 big bottles of regular milk. They were glass, like the big bottles, but they were like little and made especially for kids. And the chocolate to me, it was as good as drinking a Hershey bar. On this particular morning, though, I just wasn't interested. Mama leaned down and whispered, "Penny, I'm coming right back home after I drop everyone off. I have a surprise for you, now no tears." That caught my interest. Mama usually went straight to one of her meetings and wouldn't return home until after lunch. A surprise for me? What could it be? I picked up my chocolate milk and headed to the front porch where I waited for her to return. When she got back, I didn't see a wrapped package in her hands, and I certainly didn't see a puppy. She walked up the steps and said, "Now, Penny, come into the living room with me. I have something to tell you." We sat together on the couch in the living room, running her fingers through my hair, and I loved that. She said, "I got a call from Bobbie last night, and guess what?" I immediately retorted, "Chicken butt." I squealed. That was the given answer in our house when anybody said, "Guess what?" We had also shared it with all of our friends, much to their parents' chagrin. Tickling my stomach, Mama said, "No, Bobbie wants you to come over and spend the day with her. You'll have lunch and can stay until the girls get home from school." I looked at her in horror. "No, Mama, no. All by myself? I can't do that. You know I'm shy." With that, I turned my head and put it in her lap. For the next several minutes, I stayed buried as she talked on and on about it. Even Leola came in to tell me how much fun I'd have. Why, she had already talked to Mandy and Minerva, who worked for Bobbie, and they were really looking forward to my coming. I'd see them when I'd be playing in Bobbie's backyard sometime, and they were really sweet to me and good friends with Leola. I finally agreed. Not that I really had a choice. Mom and I stood at the tree line between our two houses. Bobbie's house was glamorous. She lived there with her husband Charlie and a good friend Eloise. I had known them as far back as I can remember, but would always visit in the front yard or at our house. I'd never actually been inside Bobbie's home. Mama gave me a little shove and said, "It's going to be fun, Penny. Now mind your manners." I must have glanced back over my shoulder at Mama 50 times on the walk across the yard, which seemed enormous, to the side steps. Each time, she would wave her hand at me as if to shoo me away. There were at least 12 more steps to go. I had to stop a few times and crawl on my knees for the last few steps, but at last I was on the porch. When I turned around, I could see that Mama was still there, making little clapping motions before shooing me again. I'd been told to ring the doorbell and wait. I reached up, but it was too high. I stood as high as I could on my tippy toes, but I still couldn't reach it. I tried jumping up and down, but that didn't work either. I turned around and Mama was standing by Bobbie's car. She cupped her hands to her mouth and yelled, "Open the screen door and knock on the door." It took every bit of my 30-something pounds to pull that big screen door open wide enough to slip inside. I knocked on the huge wooden door and waited. Nothing. I was stuck, and I couldn't even turn around to see Mama. I knocked again, then again. Suddenly, the door opened and I fell forward, landing right on Bobbie's feet. "Oh, my dear, are you all right? I've been listening for the doorbell. Here, let's get you inside." All of that had taken a lot out of me, and for some reason, I was no longer feeling shy. I looked up at her and exclaimed, "I couldn't reach that doorbell, Bobbie. It's way up there, and I'm only this tall," holding my hand on my head. Bobbie uttered a friendly laugh and said, "Well, young lady, you're right. Forgive me. I'll see to it that a proper stool is put out for you so that you can reach that bell in the future. Now, why don't we get started by getting you acquainted with the house?" That was the first time I actually took a look at the room we were in. It was beautiful. I've no doubt my eyes were huge, as I've never seen anything quite like this. Both sides of the rooms were lined with furniture, beautiful grand pieces of furniture that Bobbie later told me were mostly shipped in from overseas. What amazed me was that the furniture went all the way down on both sides of the room. One piece would touch another, and there was furniture behind the furniture, leaving enough room for just a small pathway that led into a great big living room, which too was virtually filled with furniture. It held 2 baby grand pianos back to back. In the very back of the room was the most beautiful staircase I'd ever seen. At the top of the first landing, there was an enormous stained glass window that mesmerized me. Next, we went into the dining room. Elegant is all I need to say. That was a word that I had heard Mama use many times. And the huge crystal chandelier, when the sun was just right, I would spend all of my time looking at all of the beautiful colors dancing. The colors would dance about. I would try to catch them. At the very back of the house was the kitchen and a butler's pantry, which neatly ran the whole length of the house. Mandy and Minerva were in there when Bobbie took me back. They both greeted me warmly and said how glad they were that I had came. Bobbie called, "Come on, Penny, time to go upstairs." We went into a hall and she opened an iron gate that had a little closet inside. "Do you know what this is, Penny?" Backing up to the wall, I yelled, "Yes, it's the alligator!" Quickly, she closed the gate and took me into the living room. "Gracious, Penny, you're trembling. Take your finger out of your mouth and come sit with me." We sat on one of the couches in the living room. She pulled me close to her and said, "Now what on earth would make you think that's an alligator? Does it look like an alligator? Indeed not. That Pendleton Hyde Coleman is called an elevator. It takes me upstairs so that I don't have to climb all those stairs, and then it brings me back downstairs when I'm ready. If it were an alligator, do you think I'd still be here? Who told you such a dreadful thing?" Looking up, I said, "It is not. It's an alligator, and it only eats little girls. Some of the boys told me about it one day when we were playing in your yard." My heart was racing. How could I have forgotten about the alligator when Mama told me about coming over? Bobbie said, "I'll make you a deal. First, it is not an alligator, and it is an elevator. If you don't want to get on it, I'll never make you. When I'm ready to go upstairs, I'll race you. I'll take the elevator and you'll take the stairs. We'll start at the same time, and if you beat me, you get a nickel. I'll keep the nickels in a special jar in my office, but I bet you can't beat me. How's that?" Leaning forward, I looked at the staircase and said, "Deal." I didn't beat Bobbie that first time, but it's only because I had to stop and look at that stained glass window. But I beat her plenty of times afterwards. The upstairs consisted of many large bedrooms, bathrooms, and Bobbie's office. I was told, "You never go in there," and I didn't. Her office was special. That first day when it was time for lunch, Charlie came home from his law office, and Eloise came home as well. Bobbie explained that they ate their large meals during the middle of the day. The table was set with fine china, sterling silver place settings. I'd never seen so many pieces, but Bobbie would always point out the one I was to use. There were linen napkins, crystal stemware. We only set our table with Mama's good things on Christmas and Thanksgiving. I would learn a lot around that table, such as meals are served in courses. Sorbet is not Italian ice cream, but a dish to cleanse your palate between courses, and the small bowl with water was called a finger bowl and not to drink. I eventually learned to use it without splashing water, and I loved the pretty doilies underneath. Lunchtime at Bobbie's was special indeed. From my very own cushion placed on my chair, which allowed me to sit at a proper height at the table, to the very last course, dessert. At an early age, I was taught to never be rude, and when I was at someone else's house, I should try whatever they served. Much to my parents' dismay, artichokes, shrimp cocktail, and a lobster became my favorites. Up until then, I had never really tasted them much, and Mom and Daddy had certainly never had to share them with me. That school year, I spent every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday at Bobbie's house. Before long, those days, which I initially dreaded, started to fly by. Our mornings were spent in the parlor. In a back corner sat a desk. On that desk was a poem in a frame with colorful geometrical designs around it. I would stand forever looking at it, and I would always ask Bobbie to read it to me. I always got the same answer: "No, ma'am. When you learn to read, you will read it to me." Months passed, and before you knew it, it was my turn to start school. Fortunately, my visits with Bobbie continued uninterrupted. I went over after school, and with each visit, my curiosity about the poem in the parlor grew and grew. This one particular afternoon, Bobbie and I were in the parlor. She was in her usual chair. I made my way back to the desk, being ever so careful not to knock anything over. I reached down and I picked up the poem, hiding it behind my back. I went and sat in the chair directly across from Bobbie. Taking off her reading glasses, she put her magazine down on a table and looked at me. "Penny?" I pulled the framed poem out, sat up straight, and held the poem with both hands. A small smile slipped across her face, and with glistening eyes, she sat back in her chair and neatly folded her hands. I cleared my throat, and in my biggest girl voice ever, I slowly started. The name of the poem was Just One You. There may be others who are just as friendly. There may be many just as kind and true. There may be millions just as dear and thoughtful. But in my heart of hearts, there's just one you. By Maureen Hathaway. Bobbie passed away during my 17th year. Among the things she left me was the poem, Just One You. That poem sat on the little desk in her parlor, and it held my attention for hours on end. Nearly 70 years later, it sits where I can see it every single day. It is one of my most prized possessions. The end.